When I was 18, I definitely wasn't the most mature person. I argued with my parents constantly, usually about things that really didn't matter. At the time, everything felt like the end of the world, and I always managed to make small problems turn into huge fights. One evening, things got especially bad. The argument escalated so much that my parents basically told me to get out of the house for the day and cool off. Instead of calming down like a normal person, I reacted the way an immature teenager would. I decided I wasn't going to come back home at all that night. In my head, I thought I was proving some kind of point, even though I hadn't really thought about what I was going to do next. I spent hours wandering around town, kicking rocks along the sidewalk and trying to calm down. Eventually, my anger faded and reality started setting in. The sun had already gone down, and now I had nowhere to stay for the night. I had friends who probably would have let me crash at their houses, but I knew their parents would end up calling my parents and making the whole situation worse. So I started thinking of somewhere else I could go. That's when I remembered an old abandoned house that sat at the end of a dead-end street not far from town. The place had been empty for as long as I could remember. A few years earlier, some friends and I had explored it during the day just for fun. During daylight, it wasn't that scary. It was just an old, forgotten house. At the time, it seemed like the perfect place to hide out for a night. So around 10 p.m., I headed toward the property. The road leading to it had been closed off years ago and marked as a dead end. Past that sign was an overgrown driveway surrounded by thick trees that led up to the house. Before sneaking onto the property, I checked around carefully to make sure nobody was nearby. Trespassing there definitely wasn't legal. Once I slipped past the gate and walked through the trees, the house slowly appeared through the bushes. It was almost completely covered by vines and overgrowth, like the forest had been slowly swallowing it for years. The front door I had used before was still hanging partially open, broken from its hinges. Inside, the house looked almost exactly the same as I remembered. But being there at night was completely different. The darkness inside was overwhelming. Every window and door except the broken entrance had been boarded up. Within seconds of stepping inside, I realized there was no chance I'd actually be able to sleep there. Still, curiosity kept me exploring. I slowly walked through the first floor until I reached the staircase leading upstairs. That's when I heard it. A faint creak behind me. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling. But then I heard it again, footsteps. My entire body froze. A moment later, I heard a door open somewhere on the first floor, near the entrance I had used. A cold wave of fear ran through my body. Whoever was down there was standing right between me and the only way out. I stood halfway up the staircase without moving, hoping the person hadn't noticed me. But the worst part was the silence that followed. There were no more footsteps, no movement at all. It felt like whoever was down there had stopped and was waiting. After about 10 minutes, I started wondering if maybe I imagined the sounds. Maybe the door had moved on its own, or the creaking floorboards had tricked me. Either way, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Eventually, I slowly stepped down the stairs and peeked around the corner. At first, I didn't see anyone, but as soon as I moved toward the next corner and looked toward the doorway, there he was. A man standing directly in front of the entrance, already staring straight at me. Before I could react, he spoke. "Stop right there." His voice was deep but strangely slurred. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was wearing some kind of uniform. It looked like a police uniform. "You shouldn't be here, kid," he said. "What are you doing out here?" I nervously apologized and told him I was leaving. He stayed completely still for a moment before slowly stepping closer. "Did you come here alone?" Something about the way he asked that question made my stomach twist. As he stepped closer, I noticed something strange. The uniform didn't look right. It was wrinkled and oversized, hanging loosely off his thin body like it didn't belong to him. His face was still hidden in the shadows, but everything about him felt wrong. "I asked you a question," he said again, more aggressively. Terrified, I told him yes, that I was alone. He took another step forward. "What were you looking for out here?" I didn't even know what to say. For a moment, I thought I saw him smile in the darkness. Then he turned and walked toward a nearby room, pushing the door open. The inside of that room was completely black. He leaned against the doorframe and motioned toward it. "Come here," he said. His voice sounded half friendly and half threatening. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. That man was not a real police officer. And now that he had stepped away from the entrance, the doorway to outside was partially clear. Without thinking, I ran. I sprinted straight for the door. As I passed him, I felt his hand grab the collar of my shirt, choking me for a second before the fabric slipped from his grip. Then I was free. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the house and back in town. By the time I reached my home, there was a real police car sitting in the driveway. My parents had reported me missing earlier that night. I never told them what really happened. Partly because I didn't want to admit I had broken into the abandoned house, and partly because I was still in shock. But one thing later made me realize the truth. If that man had actually been a police officer, the officers at my house would have known about it. There would have been a report about someone trespassing in that house, but they never mentioned anything. Which means the man I ran into that night was never a cop at all. And to this day I still wonder what would have happened if I had walked into that dark room when he told me to. A few years ago I used to drive for Uber during the late night hours. The pay was better at night and most rides were simple, people heading home from work, the airport, or late dinners. But one night I accepted a ride request that still bothers me to think about. It was around 2:30 in the morning when the request came through. The pickup location was strange because it was far outside the city, almost in the middle of nowhere. Normally I avoided requests like that, but it was a slow night and the fare looked decent, so I accepted it. The GPS directed me onto a long rural road surrounded by woods. There were barely any street lights, and the farther I drove, the darker everything became. After about 50 minutes, I reached the pickup point. There was nothing there, no houses, no gas stations, no parked cars, just an empty stretch of road. I assumed the passenger might still be walking toward the location, so I parked the car and waited. A light rain had started falling, tapping quietly against the windshield. After a couple of minutes, I was about to cancel the ride. That's when someone knocked on the back passenger window. It scared the hell out of me. I turned and saw a man standing outside in the rain. He was completely soaked. I quickly unlocked the doors and he got into the back seat without saying a word. "Sorry," he said quietly. "My phone died. I had to walk a bit." His voice sounded calm, but something about the situation felt off. Still, I started the ride. The GPS showed the destination about 20 minutes away. For the first few minutes, the car was silent except for the rain hitting the windows. Then I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. The man wasn't sitting normally in the back seat. He was sitting in the middle, leaning slightly forward, just staring straight ahead, not at his phone, not out the window, just staring. Trying to make conversation, I asked if he lived out here. He didn't answer immediately. A few seconds passed before he spoke. "No," he said slowly. "I was just visiting someone." His tone made the sentence sound unfinished, like there was more he wasn't saying. A few minutes later, we passed a small gas station that was still open. As soon as the lights from the building illuminated the inside of the car, I noticed something else. His clothes were muddy, and not just a little. There were dark stains across his sleeves and pants. I tried not to stare, but my mind immediately started racing. Then he suddenly leaned forward closer to my seat. "Can you take a different road?" he asked. I checked the GPS. "This is the fastest route," I told him. He paused for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "I don't like being on cameras." For a second I didn't respond. I just kept driving. The gas station cameras slowly disappeared behind us as we returned to the dark road. At that point, I was seriously considering ending the ride early. But before I could say anything, he spoke again. "You ever wonder," he said quietly, "how easy it would be for someone to disappear out here?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I forced out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I guess." Then I looked in the rearview mirror again, and this time he was smiling, not a normal smile. It was wide and completely emotionless. At that moment, I made a decision. About 5 minutes later, we reached a small convenience store that was still open. I quickly pulled into the parking lot. "I need to grab something inside real quick," I told him. Before he could respond, I got out of the car and walked straight into the store. Once inside, I went to the counter and quietly told the employee I thought something was wrong with the passenger in my car. The employee looked outside through the window. Then he said something that made my heart sink. "Your car is empty." I turned and looked. The backseat door was open. The man was gone. There were woods directly behind the parking lot and no sign of him anywhere. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he had been doing alone on that road in the middle of the night. But one thing still creeps me out the most. When I checked my back seat later that night, there were muddy handprints on the inside of the door, like he had been gripping it tightly the entire ride. This happened to me about 2 years ago, and it's something I still think about whenever I'm home alone at night. It was a rainy evening and I had just gotten back from work. The weather had been bad all day, so by the time I reached my house it was already dark and the rain was coming down pretty hard. I live in a small house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, so nights are usually very peaceful. As I pulled into my driveway, something caught my attention. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud. At first, I assumed maybe one of my friends had stopped by earlier, but the strange thing was that the tracks didn't lead back out to the road. It looked like a car had driven into my driveway, but never left. I didn't think too much about it at the time. I figured the rain had probably distorted the marks. So I grabbed my bag, ran through the rain, and unlocked the front door. Inside the house, everything looked normal, quiet, dark, exactly how I had left it that morning. I kicked off my shoes, turned on the lights, and went into the kitchen to grab something to drink. A few minutes later, I heard something, a soft knock, 3 slow taps on the front door. I froze for a moment. It was already pretty late, and no one usually visits me at that time of night. Still, I walked over and opened the door, but no one was there. The porch was completely empty. The rain was still falling hard, and the street outside looked deserted. Assuming it might have been kids playing a prank or maybe someone knocking on the wrong house, I closed the door and locked it. About 10 minutes later, I went to sit in the living room. That's when I noticed something strange on the floor. Right near the hallway entrance, there was a muddy footprint, a single footprint, and it definitely wasn't mine. I had taken my shoes off at the door when I came in. At first, I thought maybe I had stepped in mud earlier and didn't notice, but then I looked closer. The footprint was facing toward the hallway, like someone had walked deeper into the house. My heart immediately started racing. I slowly stood up and looked down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Everything was dark, completely silent. Trying to convince myself I was overreacting, I grabbed my phone and slowly walked down the hallway. I checked the bathroom first, nothing. Then the spare bedroom, empty. Finally, I reached my own bedroom and pushed the door open. The room looked normal. No one inside. At that point, I was starting to calm down. Maybe I really had tracked the mud inside myself. I walked back toward the living room, but just as I sat down on the couch, the TV suddenly turned on by itself. The screen flickered to life, lighting up the dark room. I nearly jumped out of my seat. I knew for a fact the TV had been off when I walked in. Then something even worse happened. From somewhere inside the house, I heard a floorboard creak, not from the hallway this time, from the kitchen, which was directly behind me. My entire body froze because at that moment I realized something terrifying. I had checked every room in the house earlier except the kitchen. Slowly, I turned around. The kitchen lights were still off. The only light in the room was coming from the TV behind me. For a few seconds I just sat there listening. Then I heard another sound, the back door handle moving. Someone was trying to open it from the inside. That was enough for me. I grabbed my phone, ran straight out the front door into the rain, and called the police from my car. When officers arrived a few minutes later, they searched the entire house. At first, they didn't find anyone, but when they checked the backyard, they discovered the back gate was open, and there were fresh footprints leading away from my house into the woods behind the property. Whoever had been inside had escaped just moments before the police arrived. To this day, I have no idea how long that person had been in my house. But every time I remember those muddy footprints, I can't stop thinking about one thing. When I first came home that night, I never actually checked the kitchen, which means the person inside could have been standing just a few feet away from me the entire time, watching and waiting for the right moment to leave.